The federal government under Obama nationalized the student loan program. There really are no more private student loan businesses. To the extent they even exist, they are effectively subsidiaries of the Department of Education. Now, that means you and your children and your grandchildren are handing out student loans. And the federal government, meaning you, are on the hook right now for $1.6 trillion in student loans. $1.6 trillion. And the federal government does such a fantastic job of managing money. And this student loan welfare, that's what it is. It's not a forgiveness, it's welfare. Can cost anywhere from $400 billion to $1 trillion. People who took out loans for school, and yet you don't have to spend that money for school. You can spend that money on cars. You can spend that money on vacations. You can go to Las Vegas and gamble. You can do whatever you want with that money. There's no requirement that you actually spend it on education. And they took out these loans, and now the rest of us are supposed to pay for them, and your children and grandchildren on top of it. The Democrats are pushing this, and Biden's pushing this because they view college age, that is millennials in colleges, as part of their base. Remember what I said. Always remember the power when the Democrats are acting. They redistribute wealth to their base. They do no oversight of their donor class, of Soros, of trial lawyers, of colleges and universities that produce brainwashed radical leftists for the Democrats. This is where their tenured Marxist professors are. This is where they have found a home. So there's certain institutions and certain individuals and groups of individuals in this country under the Democrats that are immune, that are to be subsidized, receive welfare in effect from you. If somebody took out a loan and they can't afford it, that's their problem. Do you think the government should go through and pay off everybody's mortgage? You think they ought to go through and pay off everybody's car loan? You think they ought to go through and pay off everybody's credit card? I mean, there'd be nothing left of this society. Zero. On top of it, what about responsibility? Why should somebody who wasn't involved in taking out a loan, didn't go through the process, didn't make representations to banks, etc., why should they be on the hook? But there's even a bigger reason, and that's the United States Constitution. Show me anywhere in the United States Constitution, anywhere, where the President of the United States has the power to forgive $400 billion in debt. Go to Article 2, read it. Read it. But go to Article 1, Section 8, the powers of Congress. This is considered the spending clause. The debt clause. The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes and duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States, to borrow money on credit of the United States. And it goes on. President doesn't have any powers of this kind. None. And so when Joe Biden issues an executive order giving up debt that is owed to the United States taxpayer, that is an unconstitutional act. That is a fascistic act by an out-of-control man who thinks he's got this kind of power. He signs executive orders left and right. And, of course, he's cheered by the Marxists in the country, whether they be historians or media types or nut jobs in Congress. They hate the Constitution to begin with. But then they claim the Constitution gives a president these kinds of dictatorial powers. That all he has to do is have a staffer write up an executive order and sign it, and poof, $400 billion disappears from the books of those who took out the loans, and then they reappear as debt owed by the taxpayer to him or herself. Imagine the president this sends? Where's separation of powers? That's the great strength of our system. Separation of powers. And of course, the consequences of this is colleges and universities, they make out like bandits. Wow, not only does the federal government take over the student loan system, which means there's almost no checks and balances, but now the federal government's going to dismiss student debt, or they're going to pay for it is what they're really going to do, meaning the American taxpayer is going to be on the hook, not just for the loans that are made, but for dismissing the loans. Where's this money going to come from? Doesn't matter. Because the Democrat Party and the rhinos, they're all about demand, not supply. Some group makes a demand, and they meet the demand. Well, what about the supply of work, the supply of money, the taxpayer? Doesn't matter. Their economics only goes one way, the demand, not the supply. And meanwhile, these colleges and universities are indoctrinating children to turn on their families, to turn on their history, to turn on their country. That's what was in the streets in 2020 in the summer. And somehow, you're compelled to pay for all of it. We have an elected Congress. We have representatives for a reason. We have a Constitution for a reason. This 80-year-old, low IQ, street hack politician Biden rolls it all. The entire ideology of the left is an insurrection. The entire ideology. And we, the people, are supposed to have no say whatsoever. None. They just decide. The moron signs an executive order, and you're on the hook. No congressional hearings, no committee votes, no participation by the American people. He just sits there and signs an executive order.